In this tutorial, we're going to look at After Effects, and we're going to look at creating a little animation where we're going to take a branded logo, so just a simple logo, we're going to animate it. We're going to do kind of something fun with it. So just as a simple, quick animation, we're not adding too much, but we are going to get into learning about the basics and then kind of growing it from there. So I have this branded logo that I've made, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create something in Illustrator where it's actually going to make it much easier for me to bring it into After Effects so I could work with it in a very simple way. So I'm just going to take my logo, I'm going to copy that, and I also have a little pattern here. I like to make patterns for all my brands, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring this in as well, and maybe I'm going to have a little background, which this project asks for you to add a little bit of a background to your particular logo. Now obviously my logo works on this white space, so I'm probably going to keep my background with a little bit more of a lighter look, a white space, not not a black or a darker look. But here I am, so I'm going to copy this. Now I know that the dimensions for this project are 1080 by 1080. So normally we work in inches in Illustrator, but no, now we're going to work with pixels because we're talking about digital display. This particular ad we're pretending to make for social media, Instagram. So obviously 1080 by 1080 is a common square. We could do 1080 by 1350, but for this one, to keep it small, the file size is a little bit smaller, and so when the video is made, its file size is going to be a little bit smaller as well. We're going to make it 1080 by 1080. RGB the color mode because it is for digital display. We don't have to make it CMYK, and I'm good to go here. So I'm going to just create, and now with this, really that's all I want to do is I want to bring in my logo, and I want to start separating the individual elements of it because that's how I want them to show up in After Effects, and I could actually animate the individual elements. So first off, I'm going to group all this. I'm going to go to my align panel and just center it onto the composition. It doesn't really matter, but it does help when we're working with like this, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to ungroup it. Command Shift G to group it was Command G, but it doesn't really matter. Here I am with my layers. So right now everything's on one layer. So I want to separate everything into its own individual layer, label it properly, because the way it's going to show up in After Effects later is going to be very useful. It's going to be very well organized. So I add a new layer. I can click down here, new layer, or just over here, new layer. I'm just going to select the graphic part of the brand. So hopefully the brand that you're using has a graphic element and a word mark and potentially a tagline as well, or other little graphic element. We're going to animate all these things. The more you separate these individual elements into layers, the more you can animate, the more interesting things you could do. So I'm going to take the graphic of this logo, and I'm just going to click and drag this square, because whatever's selected is right there on that square, and I'm just going to click and drag it up to the new layer, and I'm going to call this layer the logo. Then the next layer, I'm going to make a new layer again, and I'm going to organize these in a better way once they're done. But in the meantime, I'm just going to take this. This is the name, so I select it. I take that square, bring it into its new layer, and I'm just going to label this name. So that's the name of the company, the name that is there. This little graphic element of the line, I'm also going to make a new layer for that because maybe I'm going to do something interesting with that. I'm going to swoosh it in, bring it down, whatever I want to do, I can. And I'm going to click and drag and bring that to its own layer, and I'm just going to call it line. Now keep in mind, I've created all this in Illustrator. There is a way to create elements in After Effects. There's a pen tool, there's a shape tool, so there's a lot of things I could actually create there too. But because I've already made this here in Illustrator, I'm just going to bring it in and have it done there. But you can create some pretty interesting graphics on their own in After Effects. And the last one I'm going to make is the tagline. So I'm just going to click on tagline. I actually could have named this just one tagline because it's the last layer. Click and drag, bring it up, and I'll just throw this one out because there's nothing on it. So there I go. Right now I have a tagline layer, I have a line layer, I have a name layer, and I have my logo layer. But you know what? I'm going to go one step further. What I want to do is maybe I want to illustrate these individual elements on this logo. Now, depending on your logo, you may or may not be able to do that. This maybe, I'll have this come in separately and this one come in separately. Yeah, maybe I'll do something like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make one new layer. I'm going to call it T logo. So what I have for this logo, this happens to be the T of the logo for Tom, and this is the D part of the logo for DeAngelis. So I'm just going to take the T part, click and drag it up, and now I have the T on one layer and the D on the other. I'm going to call it D logo. So now I have all these separate elements. This element, 2, 3, 4, 5 different elements that I could animate. So instead of having them together, I could actually do something interesting with them, a little bit more interesting. But of course, I could group these as well. It's totally fine. Now the last thing I might actually want to do is take this pattern, but I'm going to take this pattern, I'm going to put it on a different document altogether. I'm just going to copy it, create a new document, Command N, 1080 by 1080 pixels, create. I'm just going to paste it in. And this is my 1080, so I'm just going to scale it up. And I'm totally fine with this. This is going to be the background of my image, of my overall animation. Now I could go online and find another image, and I'm going to show you that part as well. But for now, I just made it myself. I'm happy with this. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to this untitled version. It doesn't really matter because I'm about to save it properly now. But one of the very important things about After Effects and design in general is you need to organize yourself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to prepare a folder that's going to have everything organized for me. So let's start right here. I'm going to go File, Save, or File, Save As, Command S. And on my desktop, I am going to do that. I'm going to, on my desktop here, I'm going to create a new folder, and the name of this folder, the name of this project is Logo Motion. Now it could be animated logo, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter, but for me it's Logo Motion, nice and easy. Now I'm actually going to set up all my folders right now. My new folder, I'm going to have an AEP folder, correct? So my AEP folder is going to be where I put my After Effects project once I save it. So I'm going to get it ready. I'm going to have another new folder. This is my Assets folder. My Assets folder, I'm going to put into, actually the Assets folder should be in here, but I'll change that up later. My Assets folder is going to have all my graphics. If I had video, if I had audio, if I had fonts, I'd put it all right in here. But I'm not going to do that just yet. I'm just going to put in my graphics. So this particular one, it was a TD logo. So all my graphic elements are in there, and I'm just going to save it. It's an AI file. I don't have to save it as an EPS or something different. I can just save it as the AI and actually import that AI file directly to After Effects. So I'm just going to save it right there. Great, so it's saved, okay. And now because I kind of messed that up a little bit, I'm going to go back to my Logo Motion, and I want my assets with my AEP. I want those as two folders together, and I'm going to add one more folder just for this. I'm going to bring in a final folder, and I'm just going to call it final because that's where I'm going to put my final finished video when I'm all said and done. So I'm going to go back into Illustrator, and I'm going to make that pattern. So that pattern, I want it on its own separate. I could have obviously brought it right in here and saved it as another layer, but I just want to show you the difference of bringing in multiple files. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to save this, Command S, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to my Assets folder, and I'm just going to save it as, TD background. That's it. Nice and simple. It's still an AI. I could bring it, you know what? I'm going to save it as an EPS just to show I can bring it in as an AI and EPS. It doesn't really matter. And they're both going to be great quality. So I'm going to save that. Great. Okay. And I'm going to do one more thing. I have this picture that I saved from Unsplash. Great little picture. Something simple for the background. I'm just going to show you we could do that too. I'm going to click and drag it into my assets. Oh, a little bit of an issue. Oh, sorry, I dragged the wrong thing. I'm going to drag the JPEG in. Can't obviously drag a project into itself. Okay, so now I have those assets ready to go. Here I am in After Effects. I'm ready to go. So I've kind of prepared my graphics by using the same 1080 by 1080 dimensions, brought in some, prepared a logo, split up the layers, and I'm ready to go. So now what I have to do in After Effects, I have my workspace already. This is the default. I have my project panel, my composition viewport, my layers and timeline, and then obviously all these extra panels. You could always open and close any of the panels you want, and they're all right here to open. So what I need to do is understand something here. The project is only one project. The project is like the space. What I need to do is create compositions that go inside the project. That's where I create my animations. So let's do that. So I'm going to click on a new composition. And very simply, I'm just going to name my new composition. So once again, this is called Logo Motion. But I have the name of my actual brand, so I could call it TD, Tom DeAngelis, whatever, whatever the name of your brand is or the logo, you could do that. But for this, it's a project called Logo Motion. I don't have to worry about advanced. I don't have to worry about 3D renderer, nothing yet. And this is all going to be custom. I could use some of these, but I don't have to. The presets, it's 1080 by 1080. I could scrub it to make it bigger. I could click on it to change the number. I don't have to. It's just 1080 by 1080. Square pixels, perfect. 24 frames per second. So the 24 frames per second we're going to keep. We could obviously change it to some of these other presets, but we're going to keep it at 24. It's a common frame rate. It's totally great for YouTube, totally great for social media. It's a film-based frame rate, so it definitely works for us. And our resolution is going to start off full, but we could definitely change it later on in our viewport if we need to. So if our animation gets a little laggy or it's choppy, I can change the resolution to something lower so the animation looks great, but it's still going to render at the full quality we want it to. Now by default, this actually has to be 15 seconds, and I'm just going to keep it at 15 seconds for now, the duration of this particular animation. Your animation could be much bigger. It could be a little bit long, maybe 30 seconds, 20 seconds. But for an animated logo, you don't want to go too long where someone's asked to watch your logo animate for, quite a long time. But I'm just going to keep it at 15 seconds. If I happen to go a little bit longer because I want something to stretch out a little bit more, I can change it anytime I want. I could always come back to the composition settings. And my background color, I'm just going to keep white for now. I'm just going to say, okay, I'm good to go. So here I am. That's my composition. It's at full resolution. At 100%, I could look at it, but it's a little too big. My current resolution for my screen is quite small, so everything's a little bit bigger. But either way, it doesn't matter. I'm looking at it at 50%, which is great. So look what happens in my project panel right away. Because I created that composition, this is the composition. This is where everything is going to go into this logo composition. Now, the one thing I want to do is start organizing my project panel. Super duper important. So I'm going to click on my new layer here, and I'm just going to call it comps. This is where I'm going to put all my comps. Now, I'm probably only just going to have one comp, so I'm going to click and drag and bring it in. I'm also going to have, guess what? A graphics. So let me put in a graphics folder, because that's where I'm going to put all my graphics. It's all I really need right now. So let's do that. I'm going to import my files in a few different ways. I just want to show you how you can import these. So I'm going to open up my folder where my assets are. And there they are. And I'm just going to do a couple things. Number one, I'm just going to click and drag. I'm going to click and drag this file into the project panel. So let's do that. Click and drag in the project panel. Done. It says, well, how do you want to open it up? I'm going to open it up as footage, or I can make my own composition out of it. I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to say footage and merged layers or choose layer. Look at this. I actually have all the layers right here. I could actually bring in an individual layer, just the name or the line or the tagline. These are the named layers I made in Illustrator. But right now I'm going to bring it in as a merged layer. So it's all going to be one complete, and you're going to see why I'm going to do that in just a second. So merged layer, say okay. And there it is. There's my TD logo. I'm going to click and drag it, bring it into my graphics. Done. Another way to import is file, import. Very simple. If I have multiple files, I want to bring in many different files, I can. Right now I'm just going to do one at a time. File, Command I, and here I am. I'm going to open this up again in my desktop, and I'm going to say logo motion. Where are you? There you go. And I'm going to say my assets, and this time I'm going to bring in my background EPS. Sure. So here's my background EPS. Bring it in. Perfect. There it is. And what I can do is drag it into my graphics folder. Beautiful. The next one I'm going to do, so I've dragged something in, I file import. The other way to do it, just double click inside your project panel. It also opens up the file import. I'm going to bring in this great little background, and maybe I'm going to use this as well. And there it is again, JPEG. Now here's a cool thing. If I actually want to look at this, I kind of forget what this looks like. I could actually double click on this and watch in the viewport what happens. Right now I'm seeing my composition. This is my current composition, just a blank white square. If I double click on this, what happens is I can now see what this looks like. Now it's not on the composition, it's in its own little area just showing what this currently looks like, which is totally fine. I can close it, or I could keep it open and just go back to my composition. It doesn't matter. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click and drag, bring this into my graphics. And what I can do, I could also double click on my TD logo. It's like, oh, there it is. There's my composition. That's what it looks like at 100%. It has a transparent background. I could shut off the toggle of the transparent background. Remember, I made it a black background. It doesn't matter. There's not an actual black background on it. It is transparent, and that's totally great. Okay, so once again, I could just close that, and I'm back to my main composition, the viewport of my main composition. Great. So the other thing I could do here too, I always like doing this, is actually color coding my particular folders in here. So my graphics, I could actually click on this area here, and I could change it, they're all going to be red, and this folder is also going to be red. And all my comps are going to be yellow. It's also good to color coordinate. We could also color coordinate our logos, our layers in Illustrator and Photoshop the exact same way. You just click on them and change the color of them. So now let's get started. Let's have some fun. Let's bring in my logo and see what I can do with it. Well, how I can animate it, how I could have some fun with it. I'll bring in the background images layer, not a big deal. So that's all I need to do to get started to bring this in my layer panel is click and drag it in. There I am. I have all my layer, I have my one layer ready to go. I have it named properly, and it becomes a part of the timeline as well. There's the timeline. Now just quickly about the timeline. As you can see, it's going all the way to 15 seconds. That's great. This blue bar, or this kind of gray bar with the blue endings up here, I could actually bring it down and make it so it only plays in a certain area. But I'm also zooming at the same time. That's how we zoom. Okay, so that's actually, sorry, that's not how we skip the timeline. That's how we zoom. This is how we play specific areas of the timeline, but we're going to look at that a little bit later. However, if I want my graphic not to come in right away, I don't want it to be seen right away, I could actually click and drag where it starts. So if I press play just by pressing space bar on the timeline, that's where it appears. And the same thing of when it actually disappears. So when it's not going to be visible anymore within that 15 seconds. So I could actually click and drag out the beginning, click and drag out the end, just to show you that we're able to do that. Command Z just to get it back to where it was. Okay, how do we animate the logo? How do we change this up a little bit? Well, I labeled all the layers before, and there was a reason for that, because I wanted all those individual layers to be animatable, so I could actually animate this separately and all these different things separately. But I just brought in this one graphic. Well, that's not exactly what I wanted. So what I could do, I'm going to click on this and just press delete. To delete a layer, just press delete on your keyboard and it's gone. What I want to do is I want to take bring back all those layers that I made in Illustrator and have them come in as separate graphics. Very easy to do. I'm going to right click on my TD logo. Oh, sorry, my apologies. I'm going to click on my TD logo and I'm going to go to File. No, actually it would be right click, my apologies. And to bring back those layers, that's all I need to do is go to TD logo, right click on it, and I'm going to replace the footage. Now I'm not actually replacing footage, I'm just going to bring back all those individual layers that are in the actual AI. So I'm going to replace footage with layered comp, and there's the comp. There's actually my comp of my final logo all together. Great. But you'll also see another folder showed up. There's all my layers. All the layers that I made, my tagline, my T logo, my D logo, my name, my line, they're all there. I could bring them in separately. So what I can do, I'm going to go back to my main comp. All right, nothing's there because there's nothing in that layer. But you'll notice that the composition that was made has everything there, and there's all the layers right there. So I could actually work within this composition or this pre-composition and bring this composition into the other composition. You can have many compositions within each other. I'm not going to do that just for simplicity's sake. I'm just going to close this. I'm going to go back to my main composition, my logo motion. I'm going to close this composition here because you could have many compositions open on this line here. I'm going to go back to my main composition. I'm going to drag this TD logo composition. I could tell it's a composition. Number one, it says it, but also number two, this is the icon for composition. I'm going to drag it into my comps folder. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take all these layers, I'm going to click and drag them. I hold down shift, I click on one, hold down shift, and click and drag and bring them all into this comp, the main composition. And they all show up a little bit weird, a little bit different, which is okay because I could actually set these up again properly. I could bring in the logo again on its own flat and do that, but for the most part, I can do this on my own, which is totally fine. So I'm going to organize this in a way that I have this set up and this set up. If I really wanted to, I could bring in the comp, the TD logo comp that I just made by separating all this. I'm going to bring it in, drag it into the bottom. See how the blue line shows me where it's about to go? I'm going to bring that into the bottom, and look, now I have a little template that I can use to set up all my individual elements. So I'm going to lock it. So by pressing on this layer here, I'm going to click the lock icon. Now it's locked, so it doesn't actually move. So I'm only moving the individual pieces. So I'm going to line them up. And there I go. Exactly from where it was to where it is now. This is great. So each one has their own bounding box. I could do different things with it, scale it up, scale it down, do whatever, but I'm not going to do that just right yet. I'm going to leave that alone. If I want to zoom in a little closer, Command plus, and if I really want to fine tune everything, I can. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. But you know what? I did take some time to design this logo a very specific way. So I want to make sure everything is looking good. And everything is looking good. I'm pretty happy with that. Great. Okay, so I could actually shut this off altogether. I could delete it, get rid of it, whatever. I'm going to leave it there for now. Doesn't really matter. I can maybe delete it later. So I'm going to organize everything. I got T at the top, D at the top, then my tagline. No, my name goes first, then it goes line, and then it goes tagline. Okay, great. So what I could do now, all these have their own individual timeline and their layer there. So what I can do is start to animate. I can start playing around. Well, let's look at animation here. I'm going to close that. There we go. When I twirl, this is called twirling. When you click on an arrow and you press, it's pointing to the right, and now it's pointing down. That's called twirling the arrow. So I'm going to twirl the arrow, and every single layer, if you look at it, actually has the same functions. All of them have the transform function. Great. And now I can actually animate the anchor point, the position, the scale, the rotation, the opacity. I have the option to do all that, which is fantastic, and that's really, really good. So what I want to do is I want to start animating something. Okay, how do I play around with this? So really I'm just playing around right now, having some fun with it. But how do we really do that? That's how we just play around. But what is animating something? Let's look at basic animation, how it works. Well, any term that has a stopwatch next to it is animatable. I can create some type of motion, but just by clicking on a stopwatch, creating some keyframes, and let's see how that goes. So let's say position. So I'm working on the T only, just the T. And you know what? Let's lock everything else just because. Now, instead of locking everything, I could just do a solo where it just allows me to see that one thing. So there's my solo layer, and everything else gets shut off. And I'm just going to work with this for now. Let's just pretend. Let's just play around. So my position right now, and I have to keep in mind my playhead or my CTI, my current time indicator, and where it is, because this is also going to help with animation. Obviously something happens here, I move it, and then something changes over time. That's the whole point of animation. So let's look at the position. So what I want to do maybe is, I'm going to shut this off real quick and bring everything back. Maybe I'm going to have the T come into its current position. I'm going to have the D fly out and come back into its current position as well. So I want to remember these positions. This is where I want them to be. So maybe what I want to do is move my playhead a little bit further, maybe to the 1 second mark. Now I could click and drag this to the 1 second mark, or I could double click inside here and make it go to the 1 second mark. 100 goes to the 1 second mark. Oh, sorry, went too far. I typed in the wrong thing. 1, and then a 0. And okay, now it's at the 1 second mark. Once again, I could just click and drag it, or I could type something in here or here. I could actually scrub this. If I just hover over, scrubbing is when you hover over and just drag to the left or drag to the right. And obviously I can get it right on the 1 second mark there as well. So what I want both of these positions to come back to this area. Okay, now you could animate yours any way you want. I just want to show you some basic animation, and you could play around however you want to. So right now it's like, oh, all these things are open. I have this open and this open, and I have this open, and there's so much going on. It's crazy. Like I gotta scroll to see all this. A quick keyboard shortcut to close everything or to open certain things is just to press double press U. Sorry, I have to select all the layers. Command A, press U, and it closes everything. If I double click U, it'll open up just the certain things I was working on, but I'm just going to press U once and it closes all the layers that I have selected. Okay. Now, if I were to just have many keyframes open, it would just open the keyframes I'm working on. But right now I don't have any keyframes, but what I'm going to do to keep it simple is I'm just going to open up transform. So I just want to work on the position keyframe. Well, here's another keyboard shortcut you could use as well. If I click on that layer and I just want to work on the position keyframe, I'm going to press P and only position opens up. I'm going to press P again to close it. Well, if I just want to work on scale, I press S and just the scale opens up. If I want to click on the rotate, play with the rotation, just the rotation shows up. And I believe if I click on T, transparency or opacity opens up. Like that's how that one works. It's not O, it's T. So I'm going to click on position. Actually, I want to open everything up just because. So I close that once, close it, open it again, and everything opens up again. And I can close it here just by twirling it, just to show you some basic ideas here. So what I want to do, I want the position of the T and the D to come back to their original spots right here. So I want them to fly in and then come to their original spot. So at the 1 second mark, I'm going to click on the position time frame, the stopwatch here. So what this keyframe, see what's happening here? There's a little diamond that shows up. That's a keyframe. And what it's doing is actually recording this information, the 400 point, the 400 x-axis, and the 416 y-axis. That's another thing we need to talk about. This number here, the first number, is the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis. And the second number is the y-axis, which is the vertical axis. Later on, we're going to see a z-axis, which is the one pointing directly at you, which is kind of like a 3D axis. So I have this, and now what I want to do at this point, I'm actually want it to fly out to this particular one. I want to come out this way. Now I can click and drag it this way, but look at the numbers. They're also moving at the same time as I drag it. I'm going to hold down shift so it stays on only the x-axis. Oh, it is moving a little bit there. I want to make sure it stays on the same axis. So I'm just going to click and drag this. Now, if I hold down shift, it moves faster. The increments move faster. I don't want it to move too far. I just want it to be slightly off. So when it comes in pretty fast. Okay. Now, the same thing I want to do for the position. Actually, sorry, my apologies. That's what I did. So right now, this keyframe is remembering this information right here. Now, what I want to do, I'm going to bring my CTI back to the first initial position. And it's going to now remember. I'm going to, as soon as I start to move this again, it's going to remember that information. So there it is, where it started from. And now this is my animation. Now I was like, you know what? I did it wrong. I actually want it to fly in. I don't want it to fly out, because if I press spacebar, it flies out. I actually want it to do the opposite. That's okay. A couple different things I could do here. I could actually select my keyframes, right click on them, go to my keyframe assistant, and reverse the keyframes. I could time reverse the keyframes. Now it's going to fly in. But you know what? I messed up. Let me do that again to do that correctly. So here I am at this point. I want everything to stay as is. So I'm just going to click on the position. Great. Now at this point, I'm going to have my keyframe. And as soon as I move this off the board, I'm going to drag it this way, hold down shift to allow the increments to go faster. There I go. Now if I press spacebar, there it flies in. A very simple linear animation. Very nice and easy. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the D part. So this is where I want it to be. So at this point on the D logo, right here, it's selected. I'm going to click on the stopwatch for the position, and look, it remembers. This keyframe is going to remember this information. I'm going to bring it back over here, the CTI, to this point, and now what's going to happen, I'm going to drag it out to the right on the x-axis. I'm going to hold down shift, and there it is. Now let's see what happens when I play both. Perfect. That's a fun, simple little animation. Now, if I really want to play around with the path, I can. The path is a vector path. So look at this. I can click and drag. I have control arms. So if I wanted to, it can do something interesting like that, which I'm not going to do, but I could if I really, really wanted to. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is we're going to look at scale, rotation, and opacity. But the next thing I want to talk about is actually how we can ease this in. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, Command plus, and I want to look at this a little bit closer into these keyframes. So let's look at these keyframes. I select them. I can click and drag. I could click and drag them all just by clicking that rectangle around them, but I just want to look at these two. I was like, you know what? This is a very linear way to do animation. Obviously, you see the little individual points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all these little individual points that show up. That's fine. But what I want to actually have happen here, I want these to kind of maybe have a little bit more feel to them, a little bit more personality. So what we call that is when we ease something in and ease something out. Now, obviously, if I want my animation to be quicker, I can actually take these keyframes and get them closer together. So now my animation is going to be very quick, or I can make it very long. Very slow. Now we have to think about timing when we're creating our animations. So I'm just going to bring them in right here to the 1 second mark. and I'm totally fine with how that works. So getting back to the ease, easing it in and easing it out. So animation, if you look at animation principles, the way something starts off slow, goes fast, and ends slow is easing in and easing out. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to select these keyframes. Now the keyboard shortcut for this is F9. Now on my keyboard, I actually have to press function F9 in order for it to happen, but I'm not going to use that keyboard shortcut yet. I'm going to use the proper way. I'm going to right click, go back to that keyframe assistant, and here it is, easy ease. Now you could just ease it in or ease it out, but I'm going to do both. This does both for you automatically. Once again, that keyboard shortcut F9. Easy ease. Watch what happens to my keyframes. They turn into different, like almost hourglass looking keyframes, but it's just showing me that I've added an easy ease to it. Well, what's easy ease? What is exactly does that do? Well, let's take a look. What it's going to do is going to slowly bring it in, then go fast, and then slowly bring it out. Let's take a look at the difference here. So the D does not have the easy ease on it, but the T does. Let's take a quick peek. Now that was kind of tough. Maybe it's hard to tell, but maybe I'm going to drag these out a little bit more to get a better sense of it. Just the D. So it goes slow, then fast, then slowly comes back in again. And that adds that nice little personality to the animation. We could do a lot with it. So I'm going to go a little bit further and show you exactly what I'm talking about, what easy ease actually is. So what I want to do is I want to look at the graph editor. This is the graph editor right here. And what it does, it allows me to truly control the speed and the values of that animation. So I'm just going to click on these keyframes and click on the graph editor. And what's going to happen, this layer panels, it's not going to disappear. It's just going to go to the graph editor, which is here, and I could always click off the graph editor and get back to the normal layers. But this is where it is, because this actually coincides with the layer, the timeline. My layers are, my keyframes are here, my keyframes are here. They're the exact same thing. All right, there's a 1 second mark. That's where that layer is, the 1 second mark. Great. So I'm on my graph editor, and what I've done here, they're actually vectors, right? We're so familiar with vectors. I have control arms. I have this large one here. What I can do, I can actually say, so what's actually happening here is right now the animation is saying from here, go slow. Then when you go fast, you're coming up, go fast, and then ease it out again, come slow again. Now I can change that up even more so. Now there's options to change up my graph. I can go to a value graph or a speed graph. So if you don't see this, make sure you're on your speed graph, because we're going to look at value graph as well, but the speed graph. And what I can do now is change this up a little bit. There's also options here to create it, to make it go linear again, if I wanted to get it back to linear frames and not easy ease. If I wanted to create an auto bezier where just it's a different type of control, my easy ease, my ease in or my ease out. Right now it's easy ease. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this animation up a little bit. So it is easy ease, but I'm going to actually click and drag this control arm, just the one. And what it's going to do, it's going to create this kind of curve here. And I'm going to bring this one in a little bit too, and it's going to create this kind of curve. Now that's a pretty tight curve. Let's see how this animates now. That was different, okay? So it eased in slowly, went super fast, and slowed out again. So let's fix that up a little bit. That was a little too much. Let's just see what happens now. That was a lot smoother. So we see how we control it. It goes slow, goes fast, comes back slow again. Now, if I look at the value graph, the value is just the actual value of my position. So these are my positions. And look at this. It's going to slide in from here and slide in from there. Now I could play around with this value graph as well by clicking on the control arms and playing around with them, like where see where that position, see, as I move this keyframe, the actual one moves over here as well. So this is the value, the actual value of the position. If I wanted to come from over here, or however that works, and same with this keyframe, that's the X and the Y, all right? So this is the X axis, and this is the Y, okay? So I'm gonna undo those, Command Z, just because I want everything back to normal, but I can play around with these keyframes as well, if I really wanted to, and say I wanted actually that keyframe to be more at this point, at the 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, wherever I want it to be. But this is the value graph where you could actually change the values here as well, or here. But I could also play around with my vectors as well. If I wanted to easy ease and have these do the same, I could actually play around with these as well, and control the arm as well there. but I'm going to leave it as is. I don't really want to play around with this one too much. I could control the values right here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the graph editor and play that one more time. Very cool. I like that. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on this for there. I'm going to move this. I'm going to click on the graph editor. I'm going to make sure I go back to the speed, edit speed graph, and I'm going to select my keyframes and I'm going to click on easy ease. So now they're exactly like they were before, but now these ones I'm going to move here a little bit, move here a little bit, and I'm going to get that very similar look for both. Oh, sorry, I shut it off. I need to turn it back on. There we go. All right, that was a little faster. So let me go back and make sure these are lined up. They are, great. So what I can do to make sure they're both the same, I'm going to select just these keyframes and go to the graph edit. I see there's a bit of an issue there. This is different. Okay, so I want to make them both the same, or at least similar. And see how that looks. Let's even see how close that looks. Very nice. One comes in a little faster. That's totally fine. It looks great the way it looks. I could have selected both and did just both at the same time, which that would work out well too. So either way, I did some easy ease. I played around with the graph editor. Let's keep on playing around with the animation here. So that's the graph editor. It looks good. Now there's one extra thing I could do with this simple animation. The way it comes in, it looks really good. It's pretty fast. There's another thing I could do here where I could actually add some motion blur. So the motion blur is going to maybe make the motion look even better when it comes in. So let's try with and without motion blur. So here's my motion blur, the main master motion blur, but the motion blur I could add to any individual layer just by clicking on it here. So I'm going to add it to the T but not the D, just to show you the difference, if you could even see the difference. I'm going to make this a little bit longer so maybe we can see it. I'm going to press spacebar to press play. Not a huge difference, but on some quicker animations it might actually work. But I am going to add motion blur to both of them. Not really huge difference, but it does add a little bit of motion blur for us, which is really nice. I could turn it on, turn it off, and the master is on, so that's great. So we've done our easy ease, we played with the graph editor, we've added some motion blur, looking good. Let's continue to play around. Okay, so at this point, this is where I'm at. Well, maybe I want them to come in, but I want them to start off with zero opacity. So at this point, they're going to have 100% opacity. So let me click here at this point because I want them at this point to have 100% opacity. Click on opacity. There's my keyframe. Click on opacity there. There's my keyframe. I had them both selected, so it did it at the same time. Now when I come back this way, both layers are selected. I'm going to click on the, now I don't have to click on opacity again. If I click on this accidentally, this stopwatch, it's actually going to clear all my keyframes. I don't want that. What I want to do is just change my opacity and it's automatically going to add a keyframe. So I'm just going to scrub down and look, both of them are scrubbing down at the same time. And now what it's going to do, it's going to start off with no opacity and come in with a little bit more opacity, which is great. Okay, so there I go. There's my nice simple animation. Great. Now let's leave those for now. Let's leave those. I'm happy with those. I press U to collapse it a little bit. And now let's play with the name. What are we going to do with the name? Okay, well, let's see. We can kind of bring that in a certain way. We can do something a little bit later with it. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to, at this point, it's not even going to show up at all. I'm going to click and drag my layer away. So it's not going to be visible for a while. So I'm going to do that with all my layers. And a quick way to do that is to click and drag them, or to set my CTI or my playhead right here, and I'm going to select these layers, all the layers I want, and I'm going to press the open bracket. Now the open bracket will move my layers, and see what happened? It moved the layers. I don't necessarily want that. What I want it to do is just move the front of the layer, or on the layer on the timeline panel. So I'm going to hold on Option and close bracket, and what it does, it keeps my end the same. It just shortens up the timeline. So that stayed the same. That was Option close bracket or open bracket, and if I ever wanted to do that at the end, it would be Option close bracket. Okay, so there now I have nothing that shows up. This is going to be on its own, and then this will show up. Okay, well maybe not there, maybe a little bit further. So let me see where this keyframe is. There they are. Oh, okay, I need to move them over here. at the 2-second mark. So let me do that. They're already selected, Option or Alt on a PC, and open bracket, and it moves them over here. So now they don't show up at all, okay? They only show up when that is completed, and now I have this show up. Great. So now what I can do is I can introduce, I'm just going to say the name first. Let's do the name. So I'm going to click and drag these even further away, these last two, because I want them to show up even later. So I'm going to click on these two, Option, and I moved my CTI, Option, and open bracket, and there I go. So now I have something like this, then this shows up, and then these two show up a little bit later on. But once again, I can do whatever I want. I can move these around anyway. The one thing I didn't do yet, which I should do often because this is a heavy program, I should save this project. So I'm going to File and Save. Where should I save it? I've already made a space for it to be saved. AEP, what I'm going to call it, Logo Motion. No, actually, you know what? I should call this properly. I haven't been doing that, have I? My last name, first initial, my section number, underscore, logo motion. This is what I should be calling it. Now, me personally, I would name it also the month and the year when I made it. And obviously, I'm using Adobe After Effects 2022. And there I go. I saved my project. There it is. AEP, there's my project, saved nicely. There's my assets, and I'm going to make a final in a little bit. Okay, so now I have this set up, and I'm just going to play around simply with some of these things here, okay? So my Tom DeAndres, I'm going to bring it up from the bottom. How about that? I'm going to bring it up, but I'm also going to add a scale to it. So I'm not using these anymore. I'm just going to work with the name. I see the name right there. I'm going to drop that down, twirl it down. There I go. So first of all, I'm going to play with the position. So at this point, this is where I want it to show up. I want it to show up at this point. So this is where I'm going to add click on my keyframe. So great, I want it to show up here, but at this point, it could be doing something else. So at this point, I want it to be down here. So instead of scrubbing it using my parameters here, I just dragged it from right here using my move tool and just dragged it down. Holding down shift, keep it in line, 0, 90 degree. So there I am, there's my other keyframe. So now if I press play, same thing, and it slowly comes up just like that. Great. Well, maybe I should do some easy ease, right, to make it look a little bit better. So I'm going to function F9 or just press F9. Now it's going to ease in a little bit better. Yeah, slowly, great. But I'm going to go a little bit one step further. Graph editor, I'm going to click here. I'm going to drag that in just a little bit. I'm going to drag this in just a little bit, create a nice little hump, little curve, slow, fast, and then back to slow again. Click off of the graph editor, and let's see what that did for me. Now it's slow, fast, and nice, slow ease in. It gives it a little bit more personality, makes it look really, really nice. Now the other thing I'm going to do with this, I'm going to add some opacity. Let's add some, actually, sorry, I didn't say, I was going to try some scale this time. So at this point, I want the scale to be exactly the way it is. So at this point, I'm going to click on this stopwatch again. So now a keyframe is created, and I'm going to now go here, and I'm going to create this keyframe, which is the stopwatch is already there. That's all I have to do is change the parameters. So let's just say at this point, it was actually going to be a little bit smaller. We can make it bigger, smaller, doesn't matter. I'm just scrubbing. Now the link is on, meaning it's going to be proportional. If for some reason I wanted only to work on the X-axis, I wanted to make it, I'll click off of this and make it wider, but not proportional. I could do that, but I'm not going to. So now when I do this, it's going to go small and then kind of come in bigger. And it kind of looks like it comes towards you. So actually, you know what? Let me go even smaller than that. So on this keyframe, if I want to play with this keyframe, but I'm actually over, my CTI is over here, it's going to make a new CTI. So you know what? Oh, I want that smaller, and I'm going to do this. Well, guess what? It creates a new CTI, or sorry, a new keyframe. I have to make sure that my CTI is on the exact line of that keyframe. Now I can make it a little bit smaller, and now let's see what it does. Oh, that looks really nice. I'm really happy with that. Okay, great. And once again, if I want to add opacity, I could add opacity. It doesn't really matter. I do want to see 4 types of animation. I want to see some rotation, some opacity. We've already done that. So let me try to do something with some rotation. So let me actually do that with the tagline. Let's figure this out. Let's see what we could do here. Okay, there. And now maybe my line is going to rotate. And my line is going to rotate in. So I'm going to push back the health and wellness a little bit further. Doesn't matter where. So my line is going to kind of maybe twirl in. Oh, sorry. My line is actually a little bit where I don't want it to be. There we go. So I want my line to show up first, and then my tagline will come in a little bit later. Okay, so there I go. I'm going to be right here. And what I want my line to do is I want my line to show up at this point. So my line is going to be nice there. So what I'll do is I will create a keyframe here. I'm going to shut this off or bring that up, and I'm going to just work on my line and transform, twirl that down. I'm going to work on my rotation. So at this point, this is where I want it to show up. No, I want it to show up actually right about where I want it to show up. That shows up, and then it twirls in right about here. And once again, I could always move it. It doesn't really matter. Let's just say it twirls in right about here. So I'm going to click on my rotation. So this is where I want it to be perfect. So that rotation is right now, it's 0, 0, exactly where I want it to be. I'm going to bring my CTI back now and actually say, okay, I want it to rotate from a certain point. So I want it to rotate in, let's just say, so the first number is actually the number of rotations. So one number, if I just type in the number 1, that's a full 360 degrees. The second number is just the amount, the number of degrees in general that I want it to start with. So if I'm here, and I want it to twirl 1 degree. Let's just see what happens. It twirls one. Oh, actually, it looked like it twirled twice. It twirled twice. Okay, so that's the full 360, a full circle. So that's what it twirled. If I wanted to twirl, I don't know if I could do a 0.5. No, I can't, but I could probably do an 80. I get you. It turns into a 180. That's actually pretty smart. Thank you very much for doing that, Mr. After Effects. Okay, great. So I have that twirl. But you know what? I also kind of want it to scale. I kind of don't like the way it does that. It just kind of does it there like a baton. I'm not huge with that. And I'm also going to ease this, which is function F9. So what I'll also do, I'm going to add a scale to this. So at this point, I want the scale to be exactly the way it is. And at this point, so I add the keyframe, click on the stopwatch. And at this point, I'm going to want it to be much smaller. So I'm going to scale it down to maybe something like this. So let's see what happens. Kind of coming at us. That's not too bad. I don't mind that. But maybe we could play around with obviously the position as well. So once again, I want the position here to be exact. And then here, I want the position to kind of come in. So maybe what I'll do is I'll drag that position, the y-axis. I'll come in from the bottom too, just like I did with the other one. So let's see what that does. All right, that works a little bit better. And once again, I could select these, F9, and then I can ease those if I wanted to as well. Let's try doing both at the same time, because I know that I didn't use the graph editor on both of those. So one is a little bit quicker than the other. And I could just click on that one separately. Cool. Great, that works. So click off the graph editor, and now I'm back. Now the last thing I'm going to do is just to work with the health and wellness, the health and fitness, and maybe I'm just going to bring it in from the left-hand side. It doesn't really matter. Once again, I'm just playing around, having some fun with this. So here I am where I want it to appear. I want it to appear right about, let's say at the 6-second mark. So I'm going to add in a keyframe for that. So I'm going to twirl down, make sure I'm working, and make sure you're working on the right layer as well. And once again, they are named well. You could always rename them because these names are kind of weird. T logo, TD logo. So if you want to rename them, you can. That's all you have to do. Normally in Photoshop or Illustrator, InDesign, you actually have to click on it, just hold it down, and it'll change. That doesn't happen here. So in here, in After Effects, what you have to do is you have to press Enter. You press Enter on it, and then you could change the name of it. So I'm just going to say T logo, Enter, done. Going to click on this one, press Enter, D logo, done. Click on this one, Enter, and this is name, press Enter, done. Click on this, press Enter, and this was the line, done. Click on this, press Enter, and this is the tagline. And I am done. Press Enter. Good. So that's how we name things. And here, once again, we could also color coordinate our layers here as well to coincide, or just whatever we want. Right now, these are lavender. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to make these red as well. No, they're red, and it also changes the timeline. So if you have many layers, you could do that. But realistically, if you had a lot of layers in one composition, you might want to pre-compose it, make a separate composition, and then bring those compositions into each other. But we're going to talk about that later on too. So now what I have that one here. I'm going to make that this one layer here, the tagline. I'm just going to have it come in from the left-hand side. So that's going to be a position. I'm going to change the position. And from here, it's going to come in from the left. So no, I'm going to change the X. There we go. Hold down Shift to make the increments move more. And there I go. So let's see the whole thing all together. Comes together nicely. Uh-oh, that moved a little bit, but that was kind of an interesting thing there, which I didn't really want. Something happened there. So let's see what happened at this point where this starts to move around too. I must have moved it accidentally or added an extra one, and I don't want that. So let's see what happens. Oh, this happened. So let's see what this one is remembering. This keyframe is remembering 412, 416. So this is good. This is where I wanted that position. This one, I don't know where this one came from. So now what I can do it again. Okay, that's much better. Great. This comes in, that comes in, that comes in, done. I'm done. If I want to, I could add motion blur to all these. And the one thing we have to remember too is this little fella, this quality and sampling, because they are vectors, right? These are vector files, but remember, this is a raster program, so they're going to be rasterized. Well, I could actually tell After Effects how I want these to be seen. So if I look at the T, let's look at the D because it has that curve there. So if I look at the D part of the logo, I could actually, right now this is bilinear, so if I wanted to say bicubic, it changes it a little bit. If I wanted to say draft, it makes it far worse. Well, let's just keep everything here. That's great, so it looks good. Now the next one I want to do is this one right here. So what this does is for vector layers, continuously rasterize, which is what we want. We want it to constantly be good quality, just always look good. So if I scale it up really big, the quality will remain. If I bring it really small, quality will remain no matter what. So if I do really, really big scale, it's still going to look really, really good. So I shouldn't have an issue there, but I'm going to keep all those on to make sure they always look good. Okay, so there we are. We have this nice motion here, something very simple. So what I'm going to do as well, I'm going to bring in my background just to show that we do have to add in a background. So I'm going to click and drag that background, and I'm going to bring it in at the very bottom. And there's my background. Now, do I want to animate my background? Sure, I could totally animate my background. Let's try it out. Maybe I wanted to bring it in a little bit later. I could do that as well. So I'm going to twirl that down. And now with that, I'm going to just do a simple scale, something very easy. I'm going to say at this point, I want it to be exactly where it is. And from here, maybe I wanted it to be a little bit bigger. Nah, maybe a little bit. No. Yeah, let's go bigger because smaller, it's not going to look so good. So here we go. So that's happening. That's all happening. The pattern comes in. Maybe I actually do move these back a little bit further. Move that back a little bit further. Maybe once again a little bit further because I want that to kind of time with the end of that keyframe, which happens to be right here. So I'm going to move those back as well. There we go. Great. So I've created a simple logo animation, nothing fancy, nothing crazy. We could do so much more with this, but I just want simplicity. I want you to just play around with those 4 types of animation. You could also do an anchor point animation. I'm totally fine with that, which is very similar to the position animation. So it's entirely up to you how you want to do that, but I just want to move forward a little bit further. We're not going to add any effects or anything like that this time around. I am going to add some extras near the end if you want to try them out, but right now we're done. I'm happy. It's 1080 by 1080. It's 15 seconds. Now the thing you do have to remember is that I can make my animations much quicker. I can make them much longer. I can add my easy ease on everything and make everything and really fine tune everything. That's totally fine. But the thing we need to remember are some of the principles. We do need to say that near the end, this particular piece should have some viewing power, and that means that it should sustain for a while so people could actually see what this is. Now to make this a full 15 seconds, I should do a little bit more. There's more I should make happen, or maybe I should drag these out a little bit longer so that 15 seconds is actually filled up nicely. But at least for the last 2 or 3 seconds, this is what I should see. I should see it flat, nothing happening, so it retains that image, and the retention of that logo is left upon the viewer. So just make sure, keep that in mind when you're creating your logo, that there actually is some retention there at some point. Sorry, my computer's going a little slow at the moment. And there we go. So even for the last 2 or 3 seconds, they should just have it flat, nothing happening for that great retention. Okay, so use that 15 seconds up properly. I didn't do that a great job with that right away. Maybe I could have, like I said, I could play around with a little more, a few things happening here, but I'm going to show you some advanced things a little bit later on. But right now, what I want to do, I'm happy with it. I saved it, Command S. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to render it. I'm going to render this so it's going to make it a video that I could put up on social media. I could put it on YouTube. I could do whatever I want with it. Now, rendering is a very specific process, so let's do it and see what happens here. So let's go to Composition, and I'm going to add it to render queue. So I could actually render within After Effects. Now, realistically, I could also render with Adobe Media Encoder, which I actually love to do. It's a great way to do it, and we're going to do that in later projects. But right now, I'm going to add to render queue. And it shows up here. There's the render queue. If it's like, oh, where did my layers go? Oh, they're right here. Don't worry about that. So I could actually just go to my render queue. It's all set up, but let's look at some of the parameters. Number 1, render settings, best settings. Let's click on the word best settings. Are these the best settings? Sure. Best. Resolution is full. Remember, if I wanted to actually change the resolution of how it's going to look, it's going to be, if I go to half, actually, let me show you what it looks like here. So here's my resolution right now at full resolution. If I want to change it to half, this is what it looks like. It's a little less quality. If I change it to a third, a little less quality, and if I change it to a quarter or even to custom less, it's even less quality. But this comes into play if you have a crazy animation, so many effects going on, and your animation, when you preview it, do a RAM preview. This is called a RAM preview, when you press spacebar just to see what's going on. When you do that and it's super choppy, you might want to bring it down, bring the resolution down. But in the meantime, this is a very simple animation. We could just say full, and we know exactly what it's going to look like. So let's go back to the render queue. So best settings, full resolution. A lot of these things we're not really going to look at too much. I'm just going to say, okay, the lossless. So let's look at the output module. So there's a few things we need to look at here. Number 1, we're going to save it as a QuickTime movie. That's kind of our basic that we're going to look at. But there's another option here. We could, obviously, our channels are going to be RGB. If you ever had a transparency, if I had a transparency on this, I could just say RGB in alpha, but I don't want that. I just want the RGB, the flat, and it's going to have a white background. The format options are here. So what I've understood is that the animation codec is actually a decent codec and it works really well. However, when I played around with Apple ProRes 444, it actually allowed a great quality and much smaller file size than just doing the animation codec. So I click on Apple ProRes 444 and say, okay. So then I'm here again, format options, everything's fine. I'm not going to change up the size of it. I'm happy with my 1080 by 1080, but I could change it up here if I wanted to. My quality I could change. I'm not going to, but I'm able to. And if I had some audio, I could change that too. I'm just going to say, okay, good. Well, I'm not done yet. Where do I want to actually output it to? Well, I could click on logo motion. And where do I want it to end up? Well, you know where I want it to end up. I'm going to end it up on my desktop in that folder in my final. And that's where it's going to go. It's going to be called last name, first initial, section number, underscore, logo motion. All right, good. Done. QuickTime movie, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be an MOV file. I'm going to press save. And then I'm not done yet. I just got to press render. Now, if there was other options I wanted, I could press the plus sign and I could say, you know what, I want you to render it as that. And let me just show you this. But I'm also going to do another option. This is the plus. I'm going to also save it as that QuickTime. I'm going to go lossless again, but this time I'm going to format it as animation. I want to show you the difference. So animation, okay, and okay. But this time I'm going to save it as the same thing. But I'm going to save it as Annie for animation. Let's see the difference. I'm going to press save. Great. Now let's render both and see what happens. So as I render, it's going to kind of go through the animation, see what happens. Great. And now that one is done. And let's see what happens here. Let's go inside logo motion again. Let's go to our final, and I have 2 of them. Okay, let's take a quick look just at the file size. So this was the ProRes, and this was the animation. Oh, I spelled it wrong, my apologies. Let me fix that. I'm not a fan of that. So I see the file size, 134 megabytes. Now that was the Apple ProRes. If I look at the animation, 131.5 megabytes. Okay, they're both relatively small actually, so that's really good. I did another animation before on a larger one, and the ProRes was actually much smaller than the animation codec, but I only need one, so I'm just going to delete that. And I'm going to take a look at this one. So I'm going to open this up and take a quick peek. Nice. This is my, this is it. This is my animation. Looks good. I could fill it out a little bit more, but I'm really happy with that. So this is how we render it. This is how we look at the actual end product. It's looking good. You did all your animation. You have the proper composition set up of 24 frames per second, 1080 by 1080. It's 15 seconds long, at least 15 seconds long. You can go longer and make some even better animations inside there. You've organized your project panel, you've organized your file folder, you did some animation, some keyframing, you've added some easy ease, you played around with the graph editor, and then you obviously did some motion blur, you added a background, and then you rendered it, and this is it. This is all you really need to do. You could add so much more to this, play around with the animation so much more. I'm going to add in a few advanced features in a little bit, but this is the most of what you need to do. All right, so looking at this again in After Effects, what we could do is add a few more advanced features, just not super advanced, but something that we could add a little extra to it. So one, I'm going to play around with this background a little bit more. So what I wanted to do, I kind of wanted to just be a prolonged animation. So I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to reset the whole thing, the background. I'm going to make it the exact same size, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it go really slow, and I'm going to make it look like the background is moving continually. I could have made the background a little bit longer, so actually let me play around with that. I don't love messing with the pattern, but let's just change the scale up. So I'm actually going to delete all those, and I'm going to change the scale, but this time I'm not going to have the scale. You know what I will do? I was going to have the scale do a longer, but it's going to mess with the pattern. But for this situation, I'm okay with it. I just want to play around with it. So there's my scale. I'm actually not going to animate it. I just want it to be longer. I'm going to change the position of it. So I started right here, just like my normal animation was. It starts to come in right here, but maybe I should actually make an opacity on it so that the opacity starts a little bit later. So it comes up a little bit later as it moves in. So my opacity, then I'm going to bring it up to 100% here. So it's going to slow easy into its to 100%. And then from here, I'm going to make my position is going to be not there. My position, I'm going to move it here. My position is going to be right here, and I'm going to click on it. And then my position at another point later on, at maybe even the 13-second mark, is going to be here. So I'm going to make it go a really long way. Let's see how that looks. Let me zoom in a little bit so I can see a little bit better. So everything's there, nice, and slowly it moves in like that. Now that's really long and kind of distracting, overwhelming, not a good animation principle. So what I need to do is I need to shrink that. So I'm going to first of all delete this. I'm going to keep this as is, but I'm actually going to bring my position in right away. I'm not going to have it come in because that was distracting. So the opacity could still stay the same. Maybe I'll make it prolong it. No, that's a little too long. So maybe I need to make my opacity a little bit better. Nope, still not happy with it. So I'm just playing around. So here, the position, that particular keyframe needs to move here. So I already want it there. Opacity 0. Let's see what happens here. Okay, great. So now this position is there. Now I want this position to move over here. So maybe I'm not going to go all the way because that's too much. So let's see what happens. That's a better when it brought in. That's great. Yeah, that's not bad. I don't mind that. I could actually slower that even more just by making that not go as far, that the path go as far. Maybe like that. Let's see how that goes. So I have a little background animation, something simple, nothing crazy, looks nice, it works, that's great. So we could kind of make it move, something's happening there. That's a very simple way to do that. The other thing I want to do is add in some 3D. So I'm going to add my motion blur there too, so it helps out a little bit. I'm going to add some 3D. So how do we add 3D and work in the 3D space? It's actually really simple. Now, it's not actual 3D. It's like an extruded or add depth to the type. I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is work in a kind of a 2.5D, they call it, where I'm actually going to take this tagline, and instead of having it just swoosh in like that, there's my motion blur. I'm actually going to get rid of that, and I'm going to do something else. I'm going to make it 3D. I'm going to do something where it's going to pop in. Okay, so the position, I'm going to reset it so everything stays the same. That's where it was. That's fine. I'm going to make sure that the position is down here, right where I had it from before. Great, so that's my normal position. Awesome, nothing changed there. And that's where it shows up. Perfect. This is it right here. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to make this a 3D layer. Now watch what happens to my X and Y, when I add 3D to the layer. Well, what actually happens? So I'm going to add 3D, click on it. Whoa, a lot more happens. Now not only do I have an X and a Y, I also have a Z or a Z axis, which is it's coming towards you. Okay, and now I have orientation. That's another thing I can animate. I can animate the X orientation, the Y, or the Z. Let's just take a look and scrub and see what that does. So let's look at our position, our Z position. Well, our Z position moves in and out, right? Away from the viewer and towards the viewer. It's kind of like scale, but it's actually using a 3D element to it. I'm going to reset that. The scale, let's look at the X axis for the scale. Once again, the X axis in and out, cool. The orientation. So I have the X axis orientation. Oh, I think I like that. I think I might play around with that. I have the Y axis orientation. So you kind of get this essence where it's kind of in 3D space where something's closer to you and something's further away from you. That's all we're talking about when we're talking about the 3D space. And then we have this option, we could actually use the Z axis, which we're not really going to do. It's kind of a rotation, but we're not really going to play around with that one. Once again, I'm just going to reset everything. And obviously I could play around with the individual rotation of the X axis. All right, just like that. The Y axis, just like that, which we kind of just did, or the Z axis, same idea, okay? But we could do multiple rotations there. So once again, I'm just gonna reset that all, but let's do it like this. Let's change the position. I'm not gonna animate the position, I'm just gonna change the position, coming down the Y axis to line it up where it's supposed to be. There it is. Just because I don't animate it, I don't have to. I could actually just click on it, move something, and that's its position. There's no animation happening. That's just where I want it. And so that actually works out quite well. Now I'm going to animate something. I'm going to animate that orientation. So I'm going to make it look like it's not there, and then it's going to pop up that way. I'm just scrubbing it to make it look that way. So first I'm going to start right here. So how do I want this to work? So it's going to come in right about when that finishes. That's where it's going to start. So let me zoom in to really get that point of nothingness. All right, so I'm going to click on my orientation, my stopwatch, and it creates a keyframe, and it's right there at 80 degrees. And I'm going to bring it in right about here. Let's see where that pops up, my pattern, and I'm going to create it so now it's at 0, and it just shows up. So this is what it's going to do. It's going to kind of just come in like that. Now, is that enough to show that it's not there? Yes, perfect. So that actually works out really, really well. So that's actually 3D. If I wanted to make anything else 3D, I totally could. I can make any of these layers 3D. I can make any text layer 3D. I can make any graphic layer 3D. And now it has 3D elements, 3D animatable positions. So I could add this. Everything's normal there. If I add 3D, all of a sudden I have a Z axis, and I could play around with 3D. Let me go one step further and show you what that looks like actually on a 3D camera. So right now I'm on the normal active camera view. So when I clicked on 3D, these new options showed up. But let's look at the main one I want to look at. Let's actually click this a little bit further just to show you what's going to happen. I'm going to click on the active camera in my composition viewport, and I'm going to click on custom view. Look what happens. It actually shows me my 3D camera. Now, because this is the only layer that's 3D, it's the only thing that's going to show up on my custom view 3D camera. So I'm actually going to scrub through. It actually shows you what's happening in 3D. All right, so nothing else is in 3D, so that's okay. But this is what's happening on that axis, the X axis. or sorry, the y-axis, the horizontal axis, or sorry, the x-axis. I kind of get confused there. That's what's happening. So that's the 3D now. I just want to go back to normal, my active camera. This is exactly what I do here. So that's adding 3D. It's a really cool effect. It's pretty simple and really effective. So the next thing I want to do is show you something that's a kind of an animation principle. And that animation principle is not just bringing this in. I'm going to Command S, save that really quickly. Not am I only just bringing this in, I'm going to kind of make it like seem like it locks, like it kind of comes in. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring it back a little bit and then bring it forward. So these are going to kind of go click in and then click out and then click back in again. So let's play around with adding a little bit more personality to our animations. So let's try that out. Let's see what we got here. So I'm going to make this work with the T logo first. So I just want to see my T logo. I'm going to go solo and just my T logo is shown. So here, and I definitely want to see my keyframes. So I'm going to click on the U, and if I click U and that is X and the layer is selected, if I press U, only the keyframes that are active are going to show. And you know, I don't really need to easy ease any opacity. It's a little trickier to tell. So I'm just easy eased obviously the position keyframes, and that's totally cool. But I'm going to show everything here. So what I want to have happen here, I want the position to kind of click out and then come back in again. So what I need, this is going to be my final. So right, if I go back a few steps, I'm going to kind of bring it back and then bring it in again. So let me bring it here. I'm going to click on this. Actually, I don't need to click on that. I'm just going to click and make sure that I know that that is actually at 412, 416. So I'm going to make this 412 and 416. Okay, so it's actually at the same position. Then a little bit closer, it's going to come in, come out, and then come in again. So right at this point, I'm going to bring it back a little bit more, and then it's going to slide back in again. Let's see what happens. It kind of locks into place. Now that's just something, you know, silly I kind of wanted to do, but I think it's kind of fun. Just like I said, add a little personality to it, and let's do the same thing to the D. So here I am, and what's this at? This is at 584, 420. So I'm going to bring it back a little bit. I'm going to say 584, 420. That actually didn't move the y-axis. I'm going to bring it back a little bit. Sorry, I did the solo, so now I'm going to solo this one. And now I'm going to bring it back just a little bit on the x-axis, just right about there. And let's see what happens there. Kind of locks into place. Let's see what these look like together. Okay. So it's almost like they came closer together. I could actually even make them touch and then go back. But it's just a fun little way to play around with our animation there. And let's see what else we could do here. We have our animation there. And there's something that we could also do. If I come in here, I'm going to overshoot it. There's something called overshooting, and then we're going to bring it back a little bit. So I'm going to do that with the name layer. So the DeAngelis later, the name, Tom DeAngelis, I'm going to bring it in. So where is it? There it is, the position and the scale. So the scale is fine. Actually, the scale is what I actually might use. So the scale, I'm going to say this is where I want it to be. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to overshoot it here. I'm going to bring it back a little bit. I'm going to overshoot it. So that means I'm going to make it bigger than it needs to be. Then it's going to come back. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Not too much. I don't want to go beyond the bounds. Then it's going to come back. So let's actually do an easy ease on that, because that actually might make it look a little bit nicer. So let's see what happens here. I kind of overshot it, and then it came back. Let me make that just a little bit bigger. So now it adds a little bit more personality, a little bit more fun, a little bit more bounce. There we go. I'm going to add a little bit more fun to this line here. So there's the line. The line looks good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make it shrink and then come back. I'm just going to use a quick little scale. So let's go to that line. There's my line. I'm going to look at the scale now. So I'm happy with the scale with what it did. But at this point, I want the scale now. The next step for the scale is going to shrink really small and then come back to its normal position. So 100%, which is great. So at this point, my scale now, I'm going to make it Well, I actually don't want it to be proportional. I'm going to shut this off, and I just want the x-axis to shrink to, let's say, 0. Enter. I'm going to move it out a little bit and bring it back to 100%. And let's see how that works out. Okay, let's see what this looks like. So it rotates in, comes up, and it did a quick little, a quick little hello, and brings it back that way. That's great. I didn't even need to do the rotation. If I got rid of the whole rotation, this whole thing, and it actually just did this, it started from nothing and grew out, I could do that too, which is really cool. And because I did it from the center, that's where the anchor point was. If I wanted it to grow from the left or the right or the top or the bottom, I would just change my anchor point on that, this was what that would be. So done, nice and easy. So now I have an animation that has a little bit more character, a little bit more bounce to it, a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting. Right? Nice and easy. Adding these simple, quick little elements. So I added some 3D, I added some overshooting, I added a lot of little fun little things. Now let's move a little bit forward. Let's go to my project panel here. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to add in that background. Remember, I had that other background that I had. So here it is right here. I'm going to click and drag, bring it in, and here is my background. I'm going to bring it right there. Now there's a background. It's like, whoa, that's a little too much. So what I will do is I'm going to shut off my original background, my pattern. And here it is. That doesn't look too bad, but that white of my line is it throws it off a little bit. That's okay, because what I could do is just change the opacity. So I'm going to go to my transform. Remember, I don't have to animate the opacity. I just have to bring the opacity down. That's how we do it. So I bring my opacity down and look at that. It looks really, really nice. I had a little bit of texture in behind it. It looks really, really cool. I could animate it, scale it. I could do different things, but I'm not going to. There is one other thing I could do though with this particular picture. I could actually put it on top and blend it with everything. A blending mode, just like we're familiar with in Photoshop, how we blend. I'm actually going to shut this off here. Actually, no, I'm not. My apologies. I'm going to show you how to duplicate a layer. So I could bring this back on again if I want to and put it there on top, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate this. How do we duplicate? Command D or Control D on a PC. What I'm going to do with this, I'm going to drag it all the way to the top. Now it's on the top. I'm going to bring its opacity back up all the way. So I'm just going to reset it and it brings it to 100%, or I could just scrub it. And that obviously is covering everything. And that's okay. That's all right. If I want to, I could scale it down because it's a little too big. Holding down Shift, holding down Option as well. But it'll drag from the center anyways. There we go. Great. All right. There we go. Now, realistically, something I do have to mention, because I've already set mine up this way, if your anchor point is not in the center automatically, you can move the anchor point to be in the center. You can click on this is actually the anchor point tool or the pan behind tool, but I could actually hold down Option. If I move the anchor point right now to somewhere else, let me do it this way. I'm just going to click and drag it over here. If I clicked and drag it somewhere else, what I can do is actually hold down Option or Alt on a PC, double click on this tool, and it'll automatically recenter it. Another way to do it, that it does it automatically, is to go to my Preferences, General, and I could make it so that my anchor point is always going to be in the center of any shape layer or any object I ever bring into After Effects, and this is how you do it. It's going really slow, my apologies. When it comes up, we can look at a center anchor point in new shape layers. It'll automatically center the anchor point for you. Click on that and it'll go there. If you want the anchor point to be somewhere else and that's how you want it to scale or how you want it to be positioned to move, you could do that. If you hold down Shift, it does it in 90 degree or 0 degree. If you hold down Option, it moves it this way. If you hold down Command, it'll click snap to the sides or the corners. So I'm just going to undo all that, and there I am again. So just to show you the anchor point tool. Either way, I scaled it down, looks good, happy with that. All right, so now what I want to do is it's kind of covering everything, isn't it? So I could change up, I could change up the blending mode. Now, if you don't see some of these things here, you could toggle on the switches. There are a few different ways to do it. I could just on here in an empty space, just right click, go to columns, and I could see my modes. And when I click my modes off, they disappear. If I click my modes back on, there they are. All right, so I have my track mat we'll talk about later on, my mode, my parent link, but mainly my blending mode is what I want to look at. So I'm going to go click on overlay. That looks pretty cool. It's not too bad to zoom in, but it's a little too much, a little too gritty. So that's all I could do once again, bring down the opacity. It looks really good. I'm happy with that. So we've got a little bit of texture in behind it. It looks good. So that's another way to play around with bringing in some different types of textures, using blending modes, just like we do in Photoshop. Now here's another thing we could do. I just want to add a little other animation just to show you some effects. Now some of these effects are phenomenal in our effects and presets. If you don't see it, go to Window, go to Effects and Presets, or majority of all the effects and effects are here, right in here. The only thing you're not going to see here is the animation presets. But it starts with 3D channel, utility, goes all the way to utility. Everything's right here. Everything's right here. The good thing about this one is you can actually search for something. So even if you know the name of something, you could actually search for it. So if I say I want to type in hue because I wanted hue and saturation, well, there's hue and saturation right there. There's a few other ones that have hue, but this is the one I want. So what I could actually do is I can actually click and drag an effect, any effect, onto a layer. I'm going to put it on the T. Actually, no, I'm going to put it on the D because the D has a color, it has green. So I'm going to put it there. And now what I can do is when I click an effect and bring it on something, I can either double click on it and it'll apply to this layer, or I could just click and drag it onto that layer and it appears. But now my project panel is still there. Don't get worried there. Project panel is still there. It's right here. But the effects control now just showed up because now the effect is active. So here is where I can control the effect. But I can also control the effect. If I twirl this down, look what showed up. A new option, effects. And this is the effect, hue saturation. Hue saturation, that's what it was. If I want to shut off the hue saturation, I can click this, shuts it off. If I want to click it off over here, I shut it off, it's shut off. But right now I want it on, and I could play with it right here if I wanted to. And look, I could animate some of it too. It has a stopwatch. That's great. So let's actually just look at what the saturation is going to do. It's going to desaturate, oversaturate, whatever I want to do. Change the lightness, change the darkness of something. So normal effects that we've normally seen in Photoshop, I could change up the hue, change up the color, but I don't want to do that. Okay, so my animation plays out. I'm happy with it. Looks good here. Let's just say for some reason I want to change the effect and I want the hue to saturation to change on this from dark and then back to light. I could totally do that. So let me change that. I'm going to go and say, okay, at this point I want it to be the same, which is fine. The color range is good. Then at this point I want it to dip down to 0. I don't want the saturation to be there at all. I want it to go down here. So now there's nothing. And then for some reason at this point here, I'm going to bring it back up and say, let's restore it back to 0. And then I'm good. So there is my kind of, I don't know why I did it, but I did it. There we go. So there I have that nice saturation there. But the interesting thing is it only applied to this layer. Obviously the effect is only on this layer. Well, what if I wanted to apply to the whole thing? I want the whole thing to desaturate and then I want to, well, the effect has to be applied to something. So what I can do is actually make an adjustment layer, make a whole adjustment layer, which we are familiar with adjustment layers from Photoshop. I'm going to make a new adjustment layer. I'm going to go to Layer, New. I can add a text layer, a solid layer, so just a solid fill, a light, a camera, a null object. I'm just going to add an adjustment layer. So there's my adjustment layer. It's on top. There's nothing on the layer. What I can do is I can actually just take the hue saturation, and I was hoping I could actually click and drag what I've done here and put it there, but I cannot do that, and that's okay. I'm going to shut it off here. So I have no more effect on this one, but I'm just going to click and drag that same hue saturation effect, drag it on top of my adjustment layer, and now it'll affect everything below it, right? So if I'm going to take off I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to animate just this adjustment layer here. So I have this kind of almost empty adjustment layer. There's nothing on it except for this effect. And I'm going to do the same thing. So my animation is done right about there. I'm going to add a keyframe. I want the information correct here. I'm going to move it up a little bit and I'm going to make the saturation nothing. And then I'm going to bring it back up again right about here to 0. So it comes back up and now my saturation is there again. So now it's going to affect the whole everything below it. So now this green goes off again and now it comes back on again. So now everything below this adjustment layer is affected, which happens to be every layer. So that is another advanced thing we can do in After Effects, that applying effects and doing different things. It's actually really cool what you can do. There are so many great effects that we could play around with, but we're just going to start with that just to show you some of the effects you can. If you want to play around and add some more, by all means add more, but this is the majority of the things I need to see for this project, and you could render it out and submit that.